Growing up as the second daughter in the Wilson family meant one thing. I was always living in Jessica's shadow. She was 5 years older, and to my parents, she was perfection wrapped in golden hair and pirouettes. It wasn't just the big moments that made it clear. It was the little things, too. The way my mom's eyes would light up when Jessica entered a room, or how my dad's voice got softer when he bragged about her latest accomplishments. I learned my place early. I remember one moment so clearly. I was 6 years old and had just gotten an A on my math test. That was a big deal for me. I ran home, paper in hand, heart pounding with excitement. I found Mom and Dad in the kitchen, where they were busy gushing over Jessica's new dance routine. I waited, holding my paper like it was a golden ticket. "Look, I got an A," I said, hoping they'd turn. Mom glanced at me for half a second, then smiled without even looking down. "That's nice, honey," she murmured. "But look at your sister's pirouette." I stood there until the paper went limp in my hand, then quietly walked to my room. This was the pattern. Jessica got new clothes from the mall. I got her hand-me-downs. When she wanted a phone at 12, they got her a brand new iPhone. When I turned 12, I was handed Jessica's old flip phone with a cracked screen and told to be grateful. "Your sister is going places," Dad would always say. "She needs these things for her future." Apparently, mine didn't require much investment. It wasn't just my parents. Our paternal grandparents, Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Richard, were cut from the same cloth. They lived in the fancy part of town with a pool and a garden that looked like something out of a magazine. Every time we visited, Grandma would squeal and wrap Jessica in her arms like she was the queen returning from war. Then she'd turn to me like I was an afterthought. "Oh, Holly," she'd say, her voice vaguely surprised. "You've grown." The Christmas I was 8 really sealed the deal. Jessica unwrapped a shiny new laptop for school. I got a pack of gel pens and a notepad. Grandpa Richard, with that smug grin of his, explained, "This is more your speed, isn't it?" But there was one place that felt different, one place where I wasn't invisible. My mother's parents, Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George, lived on the other side of town in a modest little house. No pool, no granite countertops, but there was warmth. There was space for me to breathe. When I visited, they'd actually listen. They'd ask how school was going and wait for a real answer. They hung my drawings on their fridge right next to Jessica's. They remembered my favorite foods and made them without being asked. Jessica hated going there. "It's so boring," she'd complain, "and Grandma Eleanor never lets me pick the shows." Eventually, she stopped going altogether, which meant I got them all to myself. While Jessica bounced from ballet to horseback riding to violin lessons she'd quit after 3 weeks, I spent my afternoons in that little kitchen learning to bake cookies or sprawled on the living room floor doing homework with Grandpa George's quiet encouragement. They never once compared me to my sister. They just let me be Holly. And that felt like magic. But magic doesn't last forever. I was 10 when my parents called for what they labeled a family meeting. I had no idea what was coming, but the heavy atmosphere was a giveaway. The living room had been arranged like a courtroom. Mom and Dad stood near the fireplace. Both sets of grandparents sat on the sofas, and Jessica and I were placed on wooden dining chairs, like witnesses waiting to be cross-examined. Dad clasped his hands behind his back, trying to look important. "We need to talk about something serious," he began, like he was announcing layoffs at a company he didn't really care about. Jessica, then 15, sat upright and smoothed her perfect hair. She looked every bit like a future Ivy League student. I stayed still, my hands folded, already bracing myself. "College isn't getting any cheaper," Mom chimed in, her eyes flicking over to Jessica. "We've been saving since both girls were born," Dad added. "But with the way things are now, we can only afford to send one of them." The silence that followed was fake. Everyone knew where this was going. "Jessica has shown exceptional talent," Dad continued. "She's our best hope." Then he turned to me, his expression full of pretend sympathy. "Holly, you're different. More suited to practical things. You don't really need college." Grandma Margaret beamed. "Jessica is so gifted," she said with her usual enthusiasm. "Just last week, her dance teacher said she had natural grace." And me, I just sat there, shrinking smaller with every word. I wasn't worth it. I wasn't enough. But then Grandpa George stood up, his face red with fury. "This is absolutely unfair," he said, his voice shaking. "How dare you write off a 10-year-old child like this?" Dad tried to argue, but Grandma Eleanor cut him off. "If you won't support both your daughters equally," she said, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it, "then we will. We'll pay for Holly's college ourselves." She stood next to Grandpa George, forming a united wall. "Holly will have her chance," she said. "We'll make sure of it." Then they walked out. That night I was getting a glass of water when I overheard my parents talking in their room. "They're being ridiculous," Mom said. "Holly's not college material. She can barely handle her regular classes. They should give that money to Jessica." "It'll be wasted on Holly," Dad agreed. "She's just not bright enough." I stood in the hallway, frozen. But strangely, it didn't cut as deep as I expected. Maybe because I'd heard it all before. Or maybe because I could still hear Grandma Eleanor's words ringing in my ears. "We'll make sure of it." That was all I needed. The years that followed were full of silent disappointments and loud praise. For Jessica, of course. She went off to an expensive private college, the kind with ivy-covered buildings and dorms that looked like castles. My parents boasted about her nonstop. Every dinner conversation, every phone call to relatives, every visit with Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Richard became a highlight reel of Jessica's brilliance. Meanwhile, I was just there. I kept my head down, focused on school, spent most of my free time at Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George's house. That home became my anchor. Their quiet encouragement meant more than any of my parents' hollow compliments ever could. Then one afternoon, everything changed. It was the summer before my senior year. I was sitting at the kitchen table working through a chemistry worksheet when Jessica burst through the front door. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes puffy, mascara running down her cheeks like black rivers. "Mom, Dad," she sobbed, her voice cracking. We all turned, startled. Mom dropped her coffee mug. The crash echoed through the house. Coffee spilled across the tiles like blood. "I'm pregnant," Jessica cried. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. "Who's the father?" Dad asked, his voice barely audible. Jessica's lips trembled. I don't know for sure." Mom collapsed into a chair. I sat frozen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jessica, the golden girl, the one they had invested everything into, had partied her way through college and didn't even know who the father of her child was. But the reaction? That shocked me more. "Oh, sweetie," Mom rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her. "It's okay. These things happen." "We'll help you raise the baby," Dad said quickly. "You'll stay here with us." I stared at them, dumbfounded. "Are you serious?" They looked at me like I had grown a second head. "She parties through school, comes back pregnant, doesn't even know who the dad is, and you're still making excuses for her?" "Holly," Mom snapped, her tone sharp. "No. Listen," I said, my voice rising. "This is what happens when you never hold someone accountable. When you spoil someone their entire life and treat the rest of us like we don't matter." Dad stood, eyes blazing. "How dare you speak to us like that? Your sister is going through a difficult time." Jessica burst into fresh tears. "Get out!" Mom screamed. "You heartless little—" I didn't wait for the rest. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes into a bag, and walked out the front door. Behind me, I could hear them comforting Jessica, telling her everything would be okay, that none of it was her fault. Of course it wasn't. It never was. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George welcomed me with open arms. They didn't ask questions, didn't demand an explanation. They just made up the guest room and told me I was home. And I was. I finished my senior year living with them, focused on school, applied to colleges, wrote essays late at night while Grandpa George brewed tea and Grandma Eleanor proofread my applications. My parents didn't call. They didn't check in. They didn't even show up to my graduation. But my grandparents were there, front row, beaming with pride as I walked across the stage. That fall, I left for college in another city. My tuition was paid entirely by Grandma and Grandpa, just like they had promised years ago. I cried the day I left, not because I was scared, but because I was finally stepping into a life that was mine. Through the grapevine, I heard Jessica had given birth to a daughter. She named her Lucy. She moved back in with our parents. They doted on her and the baby, pretending everything was perfect again. But I didn't care. I had a new life now, a good one. College was hard, but rewarding. I found my rhythm. I joined clubs, made real friends, graduated with honors. Then came a job at a top consulting firm in the city. Within 6 years, I was a senior consultant. I bought my own apartment, built a life filled with independence and peace. And I never looked back, at least not until the phone call. It was a regular Tuesday morning. I was in my office, sipping coffee and checking emails, when my phone rang. The screen flashed a name I hadn't seen in almost a decade. Mom. I stared at it, heart pounding. Then curiosity got the better of me. I answered. "Holly." Her voice sounded older, worn down. "We need your help." I didn't say anything. "Jessica, she's gone. She ran away." I blinked. "What?" "She met some man. Said he was taking her to California to become an actress. She left Lucy behind. Just packed a bag and left, didn't even say goodbye. It took me a full 20 minutes to process it all. Jessica had abandoned her daughter. Again. And my parents? They were desperate. "Please come home," Mom begged. "We need to talk." That night, I drove back to the house I had once fled from. The paint was peeling, the lawn overgrown, the place looked smaller than I remembered. Mom and Dad looked even smaller. They led me to the living room, the same one where they'd once told me I wasn't worth sending to college. The irony was thick in the air. "Jessica's been unstable," Dad began. "She's never held a job for more than a few months. We've covered her debts, watched Lucy, tried to help, but we're drowning in it. Loans, credit cards, we're out of options." I waited. "We want you to take Lucy," Mom said quietly. "Adopt her. You're stable, successful. You can give her the life she needs." I didn't answer right away. These were the same people who had written me off, who had ignored me, and now they wanted me to fix what Jessica had broken. But later that night, I sat in the kitchen with Lucy. She was 9, serious brown eyes, shy smile. A worn copy of Harry Potter sat on the counter beside her. "Do you like reading?" I asked. "I love it," she said softly. "But Grandma says I read too much. She says it's not useful." We made hot chocolate and talked. She told me about how Grandpa groaned every time she asked for school supplies, how Grandma sighed when she had to cook for her, how she felt like a burden in the only home she knew. They hadn't hit her, hadn't starved her, but the resentment hung in the air like smoke. I spent the next few days getting to know her. We went for ice cream, walked around the neighborhood, talked about books and school and dreams. She showed me her report cards, straight A's that no one celebrated, her drawings, hidden away in drawers instead of hung on the fridge. She was so much like me at that age, trying to be small, trying not to make waves. And just like that, I knew. I couldn't let her grow up thinking she didn't matter. The decision wasn't easy. I had a demanding job, a peaceful routine, a life I had built with painstaking care. Taking in a child, especially one who had grown up in a household full of emotional neglect, meant turning everything upside down. But every time I looked at Lucy, quiet and polite, trying to read my moods like I might disappear at any moment, I felt that old ache in my chest. I had been her once, and I wouldn't let her go through the same thing. So I said yes. The legal process was long and exhausting. Paperwork, background checks, financial records, references, endless interviews with social workers who wanted to make sure I was stable enough, healthy enough, committed enough. Jessica didn't contest the adoption. She didn't even show up to the court hearing. Just signed the papers and disappeared, like she always did. When the judge finally granted me full guardianship, I cried in the car, holding the official papers like they were a miracle. Lucy was mine now. Not as a replacement, not as a rescue project, but as family. We packed up her things from my parents' house together. They didn't help. They barely looked up from their TV. "Don't forget her school records," Mom said flatly as we left. Lucy and I moved into my apartment that weekend. Her new room had bookshelves, fairy lights, and a big window that overlooked the park. She filled it with soft pillows, framed drawings, and little plants she named after book characters. I watched her bloom. She joined the school's debate team, made friends who actually liked her, and started inviting them over for movie nights. We created our own routines, pancakes every Sunday, walks in the park after dinner, and Saturday mornings at the library. She had structure, she had peace, she had love, and she gave it back in the most beautiful ways. Her laugh filled our home like sunlight. Her curiosity kept me on my toes. Her resilience amazed me every single day. She was nothing like Jessica. Where my sister had been loud and entitled, Lucy was thoughtful and kind. Where Jessica demanded attention, Lucy tried not to take up space. I had to remind her often that she didn't need to earn her place in our home, that she belonged here simply because she was herself. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George became our rock. They adored Lucy, bragged about her to anyone who would listen, hung her drawings on their walls, kept her favorite snacks in the pantry. Sunday dinners with them became sacred, comfort food, belly laughs, and stories that made Lucy's eyes sparkle. 5 years passed like a breath. Lucy turned 14 and blossomed into a confident, compassionate teenager. She made the honor roll every semester, started writing for the school newspaper, took photography classes, dreamed of becoming a journalist. My parents, they never called, never asked how she was doing, never sent a birthday card or a holiday gift, and Lucy never asked about them either. It was as if they didn't exist. Then one morning, the silence broke. I was making breakfast when my phone buzzed. It was Mom. "We'd like you and Lucy to come visit," she said, too cheerful. "We miss her." I almost laughed. 5 years of nothing, and now they missed her? But I didn't want to project my bitterness onto Lucy. She deserved the choice. So I asked her. She hesitated, then nodded. "I want to see for myself," she said. When we pulled into my parents' driveway, I knew something was off. The house hadn't changed, but the energy had. And there, on the living room couch, like a ghost resurrected, was Jessica. She stood as we entered, her arms wide open. "Lucy," she cried. "Oh, baby, I've missed you so much." Lucy froze. I saw the storm of emotions flash across her face. Hope, confusion, longing, fear. Jessica wrapped her in a dramatic hug. Our parents watched with glowing approval, like a movie scene they'd been waiting to direct. "I've changed," Jessica said, wiping away fake tears. "I know what's important now. I want my daughter back." The word back hit me like a punch, as if Lucy was something borrowed. "I'm living in Phoenix now," she continued, "with Robert. He's got a great job. We have a beautiful house. Lucy would love it." I crossed my arms. "Do you have a job, Jessica?" Her smile faltered. "Not yet, but Robert makes enough for both of us." "And if things don't work out with Robert, what then?" She blinked. "Why are you being so negative?" Mom snapped. "Your sister is trying to make things right." I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity was overwhelming. "The right thing?" I said. "The right thing would have been not abandoning your daughter. The right thing would have been a birthday card, a phone call, anything." Jessica wailed. "She's my daughter!" "And you left her," I said coldly, "with people who resented her, who made her feel like a burden. You don't get to walk in now and play hero." Dad stepped in, voice sharp. "Stop being selfish, Holly. You've done your part, but Lucy needs her real mother now." I stared at them, stunned. Even after everything, they were still defending her, still ignoring the damage she had caused, still blind to the child standing in front of them, trembling. Lucy grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. "We're leaving," I said. And we did. We walked out without looking back. Exactly 1 week later, my phone rang. Jessica's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it, debating whether to answer. Instinct screamed no, but my experience in consulting had taught me something. Sometimes the smartest move is to listen and quietly document everything. So I answered, and I hit record. "Hey, sis," she said sweetly, like the last confrontation had never happened. "I've been thinking. I have a solution that could work for everyone." My stomach turned. "What situation?" I asked, already knowing. "Lucy, of course," she said, as if we were talking about a shared couch or old photo albums. "I get that you're attached to her, and I know you're making good money. So here's the deal. Give me $150,000 and I won't sue for custody." I blinked. "You want me to pay you to keep the child you abandoned?" "Don't be so dramatic," she huffed. "It's just practical. You get Lucy, I get a fresh start. Win-win." "You're trying to sell your daughter." "She's my daughter," she snapped. "I can do what I want." Then her voice dropped to ice. "Have it your way. I'll sue. And when I win, you'll never see her again." She hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, my heart pounding. But I didn't panic. I had the recording. I had 5 years of consistent parenting, a stable home, legal guardianship, and a child who was old enough to speak for herself. And I had truth on my side. 3 days later, I was served with court papers. Jessica had hired some slick lawyer who specialized in reuniting families. The documents painted her as a reformed woman who had overcome her struggles and was ready to reclaim her daughter. I was described as manipulative, a bitter aunt who had alienated Lucy from her real mother. It was laughable, except it wasn't, because our parents backed her up, again. They testified that I had only taken Lucy temporarily, that Jessica had always planned to come back for her, that I had interfered and poisoned Lucy against her true family. Dad even claimed I was using Lucy to play house because I couldn't have children of my own. It was infuriating, heartbreaking. But I stayed calm. On the final day of the hearing, my lawyer stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to submit a recording into evidence." Jessica paled, and then her voice filled the courtroom. "Give me $150,000 and I won't sue for custody. She's your daughter, not a used car." "Don't be so dramatic. I'm just being practical." There was a long silence. Jessica's lawyer tried to object. The judge shut him down. Our parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and then Lucy stood. At 14, she had grown into someone fierce and brave. She took a deep breath and spoke. "I want to stay with Holly." Her voice was clear, steady, unshakable. "She's my real family. She chose me. She's always been there for me. My mother left, over and over. Holly didn't." I felt tears welling up, but I held them back. This was her moment. The judge's ruling came quickly. I retained full custody. Jessica was barred from contacting Lucy directly or indirectly. The judge called her behavior morally reprehensible and a clear indication of unfitness to parent. Jessica crumbled in her seat. Her boyfriend, Robert, the great savior from Phoenix, stood up and walked out without a word. I heard later that he left her that very day. Outside the courthouse, Mom and Dad tried one last time. "Please, Holly," Mom called after us. "Let's work this out. We're still family." I turned around and faced them. "Family?" I said quietly. "You haven't been family to either of us in years." Dad opened his mouth. "But Jessica has nowhere to go." I smiled, cold, flat, tired. "She never did, but you made sure the rest of us paid the price." They had no answer. Jessica moved back in with them, exactly where she'd started, coddled, excused, unchanged. But this time, the cost of her mistakes was something she couldn't buy back. She lost Lucy, and she knew it. As for us, we moved on. Lucy dove into school with a new energy. She joined the school newspaper's editorial team, started entering photography competitions. She talked about studying journalism in college. One evening, while we were making dinner, she looked up at me and said something that stuck with me forever. For years, I thought something was wrong with me, that my mom didn't love me because I wasn't good enough. She paused, setting down her wooden spoon. But now I realize she never knew how to love anyone but herself. I pulled her into a hug, holding her close. "You're the strongest person I know," I whispered. And I meant every word. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George remained our rock. Sunday dinners became a sacred ritual. They hung Lucy's photos in the living room. They bragged about her articles. They kept every newspaper clipping like it was gold. One night, Grandma Eleanor said something I'll never forget. "You two saved each other," she said, smiling softly as she watched Lucy show Grandpa how to edit photos on his new tablet. She was right. In trying to give Lucy the childhood I never had, I'd found something more. Not just redemption, not just healing. I'd found my real family, not the one I was born into, but the one we chose.